Hello, my name's Montoya Smith, aka Black Socrates from MentalDialogue, where all I ask is that you think. I wanted to give you my 3 cents on the situation. I know you've heard a million opinions on the Ferguson situation with Mike Brown and everything that's going on there. I am pleased that our community seems to be, the African American community seems to be very galvanized, and this is not something that's just going to end there. It seems like it won't be like all the others. The Trayvon Martin situation, the Jonathan Farrell, Chavez Carter. I mean, the names go on and on. I saw an incredible post in reference to the Mike Brown situation that says we're all one bullet away from being a hashtag. So, sad as that is, we're definitely trying to get this thing figured out. And I've been watching all the blogs and people write on Facebook. I've often accused our generation of being Facebook slacktivists versus being real activists. And I must say that I'm very pleased that some of the things that I've been seeing still ongoing in Ferguson and around the country. I'm here in Atlanta, and there's been rallies here, and so for those of us outside of it, of Ferguson, or those who, applaud the people that have chosen to go there, in a sense, to fight that fight. And of course, the fight's not over, and we're still trying to get things figured out. But something that I wanted to discuss, and I've seen as a running theme, and it's so common that this happens, but as we've had the situation, we've clearly, as I said, the African American community, we've galvanized and come together on this, but it's been kind of with the same narrative that we constantly hear anytime that we have a situation like Trayvon Martin or Mike Brown, or, as I said, the many other names in this similar situation, where you start hearing this narrative about, well, what about black on black crime? Or you even hear African Americans who will say, well, I want to see us galvanized for what's going on in our own communities, and we're not doing anything about that. And of course, we got Reverend Al Sharpton, going to the scene or whatever. And I saw one host of one network accusing Al Sharpton of just running to this situation, but not doing anything about what's going on in Chicago. And to his credit, he's had a few rallies in Chicago just the past year in reference to all the significant murder rate that's happening in Chicago and in Philadelphia and places like that. So a lot of times those places are not looked at until it's and now we hear all about it after a situation in which the black community is galvanized over the death of this young man at the hands of a white policeman. And so I wanted to address that very specifically and explain to even African Americans who say, well, we should focus on black on black crime just as much, or black on black crime is, we have more people that die from that than a situation with police brutality. And to be sincere, if you compare the two things, even this situation, even though we know that it happens way too often in our community, it's minuscule compared to the number of deaths that may happen within our own community at our own hand. And of course, most people will be in agreement with that. But I would challenge anyone that falls for that distraction, and that's actually what it is. It's actually a distraction. I think I read where Dick Gregory said it may have been Dick Gregory, but either way, just making reference, you don't ever hear white on white crime being justified as as justification for a situation where a black has killed a white. And so basically you hear about it and say, well, what are you doing about your own community? Or I've even heard African Americans say, well, if we valued ourselves more, then we wouldn't see these things happen. If we had enough value in our own community where we saw our own lives as more important, and we took value in our own lives and didn't commit black on black crime, it's murders at such a high rate, if we show value in our own community, then this wouldn't be happening. Well, let me kind of straighten you out on that about that. Considering that in the 70s and the 80s, black on black, I should say the murder rate for African Americans was much higher. It was double what it is now. And we know that when you go back to the 70s and the 60s and things of that nature, this is, where we really see the police state brutalize our community. And this is something that has always happened within the black and brown communities, where we've definitely lived in two different Americas when it comes to how our communities are policed. And so when you say, well, if we valued ourselves more, this wouldn't happen. Well, currently we're sitting at a situation where the murder rate for the African American community for males is about 31 out of 100,000. Now, significantly different is white males. It's 4 for every 100,000. But in the 70s, it was high as 70 out of 100,000, and 60 by the 80s. So double what it is now. And so in a sense, when you're looking back 30 and 40 years and coming up to now, there seems to have, if we've cut the murder rate for African Americans males in half, then in a sense, has there been more value? Or is it a common narrative that has been used constantly in this country to say blacks are more likely to kill each other, or more prone to kill each other? Significant difference currently, 31 out of 100,000 compared to white males, 4 out of 100,000. So I don't want to dismiss that as that's not being significant. That is a very significant number, a significant difference. So yes, black on black crime is a problem, but they are not related to the situation with police brutality, where we have officers of the state who are held to a higher standard and are supposed to know how to act in these situations. And what you have to distinguish, and why I say they are not related, is this right here. The situation with a police officer, when we have a situation like Mike Brown, this is a culminating point to the things that I've already been speaking to, where we had this consistent over-policing of one community. And so when we see a black or brown person die at the hands of a police officer, this is a culminating point of something that has been steady in our community. And so what I would tell you is, if we watched the murder rate cut in half over the last 30 or 40 years, like I say, still a significant issue within our own community, but we haven't seen anything different with the policing of our community. And the death at the hand of an officer of the law, whether white or black, is a culminating point of this common narrative that is ran through our communities. So if you can understand what I'm trying to point out, is they're not related. We're watching the murder rate go down over the course of the last 30 or 40 years, but we still have the situation where when I say over policed, you just look at the justice system, where as African Americans, we're half of the prison system, but unfortunately a lot of those are part of the drug war that was driven to criminalize a certain segment. And this is something that has happened historically in this country. You can do the research and you will see that it is consistently criminalized one group in order to have slave labor within the prison industrial complex. And so when I say this, a death like a police officer from murdering Mike Brown, is a culminating issue when it comes to the prison industrial complex. That's where the difference lies. And let's just put these numbers in context. So in the worst years, and the murder rate has slowly gone down over the last few years in this country, but prison people still go to prison, and that rate is still going because the prison industrial complex puts a lot of money in keeping that narrative out there and putting people in prisons and being tough on crime, even though we've seen crime significantly go down over the course of the last 40 years. We're still putting more people in prison, 2 million people in prisons. But let's put some numbers on this. So in the worst years in the United States, in the worst years, you may have, this is a high number, I mean, you've heard it used before, but you may have 9,000 black people murdered in a given year. That's a high year. This is going back to the crack era and things of that nature. So right now it's usually averaging around 7,000 to 8,000. Granted that things have went down since that time, but 9,000 deaths in a year is a problem when you compare the decade that we've been in Iraq, and it's about the same number. So definitely in one given, in a bad year, that's the type of numbers that you might see. So like I said, I'm not dismissing black on black crime as being an issue. But on the other hand, there's 500,000 black fathers sitting in the prison industrial complex right now. And so, as I said, when you see an officer of the law who's held to a higher standard, who goes as far as to actually kill one of us, which is a situation that is galvanizing, but we do know that happens in our community, is that's not what normally happens, but we are being over-policed and being harassed by the police to the extent that we're being driven into prisons as a people, as a race, as a community, to the extent that we have 500,000 black fathers currently sitting in the prison industrial complex. So with that said, please understand that while we definitely need to deal with the black on black crime, the numbers that I've just shared with you show you that having more value in the black community for life, which we absolutely need to do, we must focus on that issue. It is something that we need to take care of. Please stop bringing it up when we've had an officer of the state who's held to a higher standard, who's supposed to be trained how to handle situations, that overstep their bounds. And unfortunately, it seems like they constantly overstep their bounds in our community. So there's a reason that that happens, because of the context of the African American community being, criminals, and look at their murder rate. Well, 9,000, which is a terrible number in a worse year, does not compare to how many people are being put in prison by the police state in the death of an African American at the hands of a police officer, whether black, white, Hispanic, or whatever, is a combination of that prison industrial complex, which is having a much more bigger effect on our community and our families than America would ever want to give credit for. So that's just my 3 cents. I just wanted to point out a few distinctions that I've seen, in reference to stop making the arguments as though they coincide. Yes, we need to deal with both issues, but there is absolutely nothing wrong with focusing on what's happening with the police state as being a combination point of a huge, much bigger issues. So that's my 3 cents for this evening. Keep in mind, October is the National Month of Resistance against End Mass Incarceration. We're going to be doing some Mental Dialogue live experiences here in Atlanta to talk about our rights when being stopped by the police. So look forward to that. We should be live streaming that, looking to do that in October during the National Month of Resistance against Ending Mass Incarceration. Again, my name is Montoya Smith, aka Black Socrates from Mental Dialogue. All I ask is that you think. If you want to give your input in on this, please hashtag us at Just My 3 Cents. Hashtag Just My 3 Cents. Follow us on Twitter at twitter.com/mental_dialogue, and facebook.com/mental dialogue. All I ask is that you think.